everyone. This is Dr. Steve Smith. Welcome back to my YouTube page. And let me get right to a scripture passage from the New Testament, from 1 Peter chapter 3. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to an account for the hope that is within you, yet do it with gentleness and reverence. That's 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. And the reason I'm mentioning is today we're talking about stand and deliver, an activity that's especially designed for my seminarians in my scripture class. But anyone who's watching this YouTube video, I hope, can learn a few things, some pointers about preparing to articulate the gospel message in everyday language in a one-on-one context. In many ways, that Petrine mandate, from which I just read, gives us all that we need to know. But let me try to unpack that a bit more in terms of this activity that I call stand and deliver. Perhaps public speaking excites you and thrills you. Perhaps it gives you the jitters. Perhaps it's intimidating knowing that you've got a 2-minute clock and a professor watching and grading you to try to get across in a comfortable, relaxed way some truths about our holy faith. I think there are some things that we can do to alleviate some of those pressures, to let some steam out of the valve, as it were. In short, I would say we can take a page out of the playbook from Father Barron and his Catholicism series, the New Evangelization topic in particular that he wrote upon, which is to say we want to be clear, personable, relaxed, inviting in what we say and in how we say it. Over the years that I've been presenting, I've certainly made many mistakes, and you just have to kind of get back up again and dust yourself off, and with God's grace, learn from the experience. I've also found that in addition to practice, which is probably the most important discipline we can adhere to, there are a number of useful books and useful ideas. For one thing, I've been watching pretty carefully the whole sort of TED phenomena, and I found this book by Carmine Gallo helpful just to get a sense of some of the insights of the TED movement. So the book is called Talk Like TED, and the subheading is 9 Public Speaking Secrets for the World's Top Minds. Now, you don't need to read this book to be an effective speaker, but the point is that there are certainly resources out there that can help, some more than others. That's a pretty good book. There's another good book by David Nihill, Nihill, called, and I love this title, Do You Talk Funny? It is designed to help people find their humorous voice and to inject humor in a natural way into conversation and into public speaking. But there's many more tips that go far beyond stand-up comedy and comedians, and so I would recommend that book. And another book I want to draw a few insights from today as we talk about stand and deliver is one of my favorites by British barrister Graham Davies, a book called The Presentation Coach. And this book by Graham Davies is always on my desk within an elbow's reach because there's so many helpful tools that he offers within the book. One of the things that Davies says at the start of the book, which I really have found helpful, is that he describes his method as bare knuckle presenting. He says, you're not in a fight with the audience, but make no mistake about it, you are in a fight for people's attention, to command their attention. And there are many potential obstacles that can get in the way. Sometimes it's the audience, sometimes maybe the room or the environment, noises that you can't necessarily control, an air conditioner going on or off, someone with a loud cough, a crying baby. There's all sorts of things that can happen, but Graham Davies also says one of the things that you need to fight against are those internal habits of the presenter itself. So if we're not careful, he's suggesting, it's like we're shadowboxing with ourselves, becoming our own worst enemy. So we need to eliminate things like clutter and empty phrases and repetitive and redundant arguments and all these sorts of ideas. Now, in addition to what he says about bare knuckle presenting, let me suggest a couple of other things that I think are helpful as you move towards your own presentation. I recommend what Graham Davies calls developing a micro statement. in response to your particular question. A microstatement is what you would say if you could fit on a postage stamp, or within 10 seconds, if you only had 10 seconds, say on an elevator, to answer a question about the faith. The question should address all the critical information in a clear and convincing way. So writing this statement is not simply a matter of getting an idea down on paper that might be one of a number of things you say, but it's your overarching concept that you want to get across. So let's say that you're asked a question about the Gospels, about their authenticity. Maybe the question is something like, Father, why should we trust the 4 Gospels over some of these other so-called apocryphal Gospels? What makes them different? Now, how would you write a microstatement about, to get at your particular answer is in many ways going to depend upon what avenue that you take. But let's just suppose you're taking a straightforward defense of the apostles, right? You probably would want to have something in that microstatement about the importance of eyewitness testimony, and that there is in fact overwhelming evidence in support of the eyewitness character of the Gospels. Therefore, the authenticity of them, from a human perspective, is very, very high, very, very credible, because overwhelmingly we can say the evidence points in that direction. Now, once you have your microstatement written to address the particular question that you've been asked, you want to build on that platform. And what I recommend is, again, from Graham Davies' book, developing what he calls a fact filter. This really works in many ways on a term paper or in other projects where you're called to communicate, but let's just keep it to stand and deliver. The fact filter goes something like this. There are certain facts that you're going to come across in researching your question, facts that are nice to know. Someone will say, that's interesting, that's helpful, that's nice to know that. There are other facts that you'll come across that you believe or deem that the person should know. They really should or ought to know this information if they're going to understand what's at stake. But then the last category is the need to know. To not report on this material would in some ways be insufficient, incorrect, and at the very least incomplete. And so you need to think about, as you assess information, what information is nice to know or even should know, and separating that from the need to know. And in building your argument, remembering you only have 2 minutes, I would say that for the most part, you're probably going to want to stick with the need to know information. Now, that's not to say it can't be deep or substantive. It's just to say that you're going to have to make sure that you streamline it in such a way that you're beginning with the need to know and then adding in other information as time permits. In another chapter of the book by Graham Davies, the presentation coach, he talks about how to structure a presentation. And there's 2 phrases that he uses that I'd like to introduce to you, which I think are helpful in addition to this big idea of the microstatement. Those phrases are the starting position and the finishing position. Now, the starting position is where the audience is at as you come into your presentation. Their worldview, their beliefs, their knowledge, their wants and needs. The finishing position is where you want them to be after having finished successfully your presentation. And so in some sense you can evaluate the success of the presentation just in terms of content and delivery, in terms of how those 2 things correlate and really connect. In other words, how you say and what you say and how that interfaces with what the audience wants and or needs to hear will in many ways determine, at least in the audience's point of view, the overall success or outcome of the presentation. Now, I recommend, as you go about this project, working with your partner, to actually write out your presentation. And I'll give you some reasons why I think that's important. To not simply get some ideas down on a legal pad and then get with your partner and try to just give it sort of organically. To actually write it out, what you will say. There's a few reasons for this. First, you can think more effectively when you're in front of a screen or a piece of paper than you can when you're winging it in front of your partner or in front of 25 people. Writing it out also allows you to eliminate faulty arguments and clutter. Ideas, again, that you need to try to weed out to make sure that your presentation is streamlined and as persuasive as possible. Graham Davies has a phrase, complexity kills, right? But which means we don't want to have some kind of an intricate structure or a circuitous structure which is going in circles all over the place. And sometimes, in fact most often, writing it out will help you to see where there is repetition, redundancy, clutter, and this kind of thing. Writing it out will also allow you to be creative in adjusting the order. Maybe it's not a matter of eliminating something, but a matter of emphasizing or rearranging it to the front, the beginning, the middle, wherever it might be. And last but not least, writing out your presentation will allow you to be thinking about that micro statement, right? Your big idea, and asking yourself at every point, really at every sentence in there, how does this support my micro statement in such a way that it will be helpful to the audience and information that they need to know. As you're writing, you're also going to be at some stage involved in writing/editing and eventually simply editing. Once your draft is finished and you're editing your presentation, you're now focused on some different things. For example, you need to really be self-critical in the editing phase. I think some speakers, it's like they've injected or been injected with a truth serum before they get up and speak and feel compelled to say everything that they need to say. It's like, relax, the catechism's right there. There's more on that topic in paragraphs 500 through 550. Okay, so you don't need to say everything. You need courage and focus at the editing stage, as well as humility, to recognize that you don't want to overwhelm the speaker, you want to persuade the speaker. Include your best points. And on that last note, you may want to really spend some time with your partner asking him what he thinks your best arguments are and why. Maybe it's the same as what you think. Maybe he'll have some explanations on hidden ones that you didn't see. Let's talk a little bit about audiences. Now, obviously, every audience is in some ways unique from another, right? And in your case, for Stand and Deliver, I've given you an audience of one. And it's a parishioner or a person at your parish, not necessarily a member, but someone from your parish who has presented themselves to you in a conversation. And what the Stand and Deliver role play really is a 2 or 3 minute snapshot out of that larger conversation where they get to asking you this particular question. So you have to kind of use your imagination that there's a linear spectrum of, introductions and so on, and then at some point, hey Father, let me ask you about the Gospels. Okay, so that's the Stand and Deliver snapshot. And I've given you information so that you know a little bit about the parishioner. I've said they come from all walks of life. Many are Catholic, some are not. Many are faithful, some are agnostic or atheistic or from other walks of life. So you need to try to address and contour your answer, not just to a generic audience, but to the particular person. Again, as I said in class, if they're a 19-year-old focused missionary, you're going to probably want to address that differently than if it's a 51-year-old sort of lukewarm Catholic, right, or a Jewish person or someone from another faith or background altogether. Regardless, this is a general rule that you must adhere to with regard to delivering to an audience. You must work hard so the audience doesn't have to. You must work hard in your development of your presentation so the audience can enter into your presentation with ease. The presentation should be easy to follow, easy to remember, and easy to communicate or share with others. What good is it, no matter how many facts or orthodoxy that you have involved in your presentation, if they simply can't make sense of it? What good is it if they can't remember after they talked with you what it is that you said, because you talked so quickly, right? Or gave them so many facts, or didn't explain them clearly, or maybe didn't illustrate them well or illuminate them well with an anecdote or humor or some memorable phrase, that they're not going to remember most of it after they walk away. And then the persuasive factor, we want to ignite interest and desire, curiosity, right? And so if your presentation is persuasive, it will not only be easy to follow and remember, but hopefully in their minds and their hearts be something that they want to share with others. They can go back home to their spouse or to maybe a coworker and say, hey, you'll never believe I had this great conversation with Father Mike, and here's what he had to say about the Gospels. Have you ever heard that before? Right? And now the evangelization becomes a kind of contagion, and it spreads through in a natural way. Work hard so your audience doesn't have to. Practice, practice, and practice is ultimately what's going to get you there. Not me, not Father Barron, not Graham Davies, not even the Venerable Fulton Sheen, right? These are all great ideas and models and helps, but you need to work on your presentation, not the one I would give, not the one Father Barron would give. It's going to take practice. So, some practical details about your practice sessions. First, assume the position that you will when you're speaking. If you're going to be standing, which you will, make sure you're standing when you address your partner. If you're going to be on the 90-second or 2-minute clock, make sure that he's really clocking you. If you've got a great presentation, but it's 4 minutes too long, then you're both not doing your job in that particular respect. So make sure that you're going through it as you would on game day. You may know every major performer, whether it's Jerry Seinfeld, the Rolling Stones, whomever, will go into the sound stage or the stage or whatever it is, and they'll test the mics and the equipment and everything else, and run through the song or the comedy act, whatever it is, exactly like they would give it as much as possible, accepting the audience being there. So you want to create an environment that's as close to the one that you're going to give your presentation in. Also, I don't think it's helpful to memorize your presentation. I don't think that that's helpful for, a number of reasons. But mainly because of this. What's going to happen is when you get into the room, and I'm there, and all the guys are there, and now it's your turn, and the lights are, so to speak, on you, what happens when you miss a sentence or forget a particular statement? You're going to try to be struggling to pull that back down from your memory in your head. And that will just add more nerves and more, you're going to get more nervous. It's just not going to work out well, okay? So what I recommend doing is to memorize it approximately 70%. Which means that you're not going word for word, but maybe you're going sort of thought for thought or point for point. Now, the only two exceptions that I would make are these. Number one, the opening and closing. The opening and closing sentences are crucial to make sure that you get off on the right foot. Your opening statement may also well be your micro statement. But even if it's not, and the micro statement's another couple sentences on, your opening statements to make sure you get off on the right foot. So you want that word for word. Same thing with your closing statement. You want to be strong, a strong finish. You never want to end with, well, that's all I have to say, or I hope that helps you, and all that filler stuff, right? End with a strong foot firmly planted, and you're done. The other exception, things that you would want to memorize and have at the ready, are any very essential facts or a particular quote. Or, if you will, a zinger. Something that you want to have 90% or ideally 100% at the ready so it comes out fluidly and exactly as you want. But for the rest of it, I wouldn't go word for word. I would know it very well. All right? So there's no way that you can get lost up there. It's just it's going very fluidly, right? But you do have the general sequence of ideas and structure of it. Okay, so aim for the 70% rule. Finally, as far as the delivery, some closing remarks about delivery itself. First and foremost, you've got to find that confidence within you. I would be praying about this throughout the process. Have your partner praying for you, right? And certainly do the same for him. Here are some additional things to consider as you move towards delivery. One of my favorite actors is Anthony Hopkins. And if you've ever seen movies like Silence of the Lambs, The Remains of the Day, or any other number of movies that Hopkins has been in, you know that he's an incredible actor. And one of the things that has struck me about watching Anthony Hopkins is how many times I have heard him say the following. He's asked a question how he prepares or what his method is and if he's a so-called method actor. And one of the things he says that is still astounding to me is that he memorizes his part of the script of a movie. And when asked the question, well, how many times does he run through it and commit it to memory and run through it again, and the magic number for him is 500 times. And I've seen Charlie Rose, I've seen other people ask him, and every time he gives the same answer. That's not an exaggeration or just a kind of a hyperbole. He has this kind of a tally he keeps 500 times. Now, I'm not suggesting or requiring you to do the same as him, but let's all admit that that's a remarkable commitment to craft. And if we're going to be serious about the new evangelization and reaching people for Christ in the manner that St. Peter talks about in his epistle, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our Lord to bring our A game, to not be lazy, to not sort of phone something in. One of the things that Hopkins says about why he committed to that number is he said, when I get to 498 and 499, now 500, and he goes to the set, he's free. He is fully given over to that character. He is that character. Everything in his mind is so clear. It's not a question of what words are going to come out, but maybe his body language, how he listens, the small nuances of emotion and affect, all those things he's freed up to be spontaneous because it's crystal clear in his mind. And while that number may not be something that you can apply to this exercise, nor am I suggesting you in any way have to, the takeaway from it is that practice does help to make more perfect. Now, just a few things about body language and logistics. Remember that when you're with your partner, you're probably going to be talking in a volume that I am right now. But when you come in on game day, you're going to have to up the volume level accordingly. We're in a fairly large room, and it's absorbed by all the bodies in the room, and there's 23, 25 of us there. The air conditioner may be on. So you need to make sure that the person in the back row can hear as well as in the front row. That's while your audience is the person you're speaking to, the guy in front of you, and your eye contact is focused on him, you need to be thinking to make sure that everyone can hear you clearly and effectively, right? Also, arms really bother people, right? Speakers are always not knowing what to do with their arms. A couple simple rules. Don't leave them in your pockets. That just looks so casual and frankly sloppy, right? I would say, one of the best pieces of advice I got about your arms is just let them be. Pretend they're sort of 10-pound salamis. Keep them calmly at your side, and when you use them effectively. People sometimes talk about the power range in the chest to facial area. So if you're making a gesture or a point or enumerating something, do it in a way that you're not going to be distracting them away from the eye-to-eye contact that you're trying to make with them. Try not to shuffle. A lot of people, when they get nervous, start moving around. Plant your feet on the ground as if they're kind of stapled in there and don't move. It's amazing what happens when you can develop that skill of standing with your feet in place. You might think that it would make a person look robotic, but it actually makes you look much more natural. Try it sometimes. Try giving a presentation, committing yourselves to not moving either foot once, and watch what happens. It's going to give a kind of a power and a dynamism to your upper body that I think you'll find very, very helpful. Last but not least, I'm asking you to do all of this with no notes. So your partner must come up and know his question, really your question that he's going to ask you. Hey, Father, I've got a question, and then he delivers it, right? And then you begin. And at that point, the timer will begin, all eyes will be on you, but you can relax because you will be absolutely ready to stand and deliver. God bless.